What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to dive into my top 5 co-angler tactics, techniques that are going to make you a better co-angler. Okay, look at this. This is the thing, okay? I started fishing. I fished a lot of tournaments in the back of the boat before I went to the front of the boat. And a lot of great anglers that we look at in their careers, they did that. And we'll dive into that here in a minute, but top 5 baits, it's hard to pick only 5. But I'm going to do it right now.
Let's go.
We're here in Mexico. We are in the Dominican Republic. So I'm going to tell you a couple of different tips that have helped me over the years.
Wow! Unbelievable! Jacob Wheeler makes history!
Okay, so this is, again, a tough situation because 5 baits for me, I go through so many different ones, but I look back at the greatest co-anglers that have been in my boat, also some of the best that have consistently caught them day in and day out of the back of the boat. And there's definitely a couple different things that come to mind. Now, if we look at co-anglers that started in the back of the boat, Scott Martin started in the back of the boat. He was fishing FLW at that point in time. Look at Justin Lucas. Absolutely crushing him. Stetson Blaylock. The one thing as a co-angler that you have to do, no matter what technique you're using, you have to think a little bit outside the box, and you cannot copy what your boater is trying to do necessarily. Typically that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to sit there and throw the exact same lure. I'm trying to throw something just a little bit different. So you really have to be paying attention to not only what your boater is doing and trying and what they're hitting, what areas are they hitting, what areas are they targeting, but then also trying to do something a little bit different. If they're fishing deeper, try to fish shallower. If they're fishing shallower, vice versa. If they're not missing a couple little key places on the bank, that is really the nuances of co-angling. And the best co-anglers that I've ever had, as far as fishermen and is done better than I have and whooped me out of the back of the boat, they have never tried, they're never worried about where I'm casting or trying to beat me to a piece of cover. They're always worried about how to figure out the fish that I'm fishing over, which there's a lot of fish all over the country and a lot of fish all over a lot of these places that we're fishing. Now, maybe not so much in Indiana, in the Ohio River, or in Ohio, where it's a little bit tough to get a bite. You might not have as many opportunities, but a lot of these places that you have co-angler tournaments, you're going to have a chance to get your bites, okay? Now, going into the number 1 lure, just the premise of this, I feel like the best fishermen that I've seen going up through the ranks have always been finesse fishermen, or were very good at utilizing finesse tactics to get bites. And that's a lot of times whether you're fishing the BFLs, you're fishing Toyota Series, Bass Opens, whatever it is, consistency is everything. And consistently getting checks, consistently getting, being in the top 10s, winning is tough because at the end of the day, you're completely dictated. You're really pushing on your boater or depend on your boater to put you around some quality fish. But it really does teach you so much to not be in control and have to fish what was in front of you. You learn more, I feel like, sometimes as a co-angler than I have, than trying to go out there and just going and doing the one thing that you want to do. You have to sort of adjust your game plan accordingly. Now, number 1 lure for me is going to be, I'm picking up the spinning pole, boys and girls, a drop shot, okay? This one right here, I got a 1/4 ounce weight on this thing right here. This is exactly probably the setup that I would use. 7-foot, medium heavy action rod. This one's actually more of a Texas rig. I got a finesse NEKO on there with a worm, but just drop shots in general, whether you're fishing for smallmouth, spotted bass, or largemouth. And I think a lot of people maybe misjudge a drop shot in general. They think it's a shallow or a deep water technique only. You see a lot of co-anglers do really well on Tennessee River lakes, or when the fish are grouped up offshore and the guys are throwing bigger baits out there. They're catching they're playing cleanup in the back of the boat with the smaller finesse tactics. The thing is, at the end of the day, I've caught a ton of really nice fish, and my boy NBJ has taught me over the years that, hey man, don't be afraid to pick up a drop shot in 2 foot of water. Now that's a West Coast thing. I remember hearing stories of them talking about, Mark talking about them catching them in toolies and just pitching a drop shot around with a bait caster and bigger line. That's not a bigger deal out east. You know, really, we don't do that a lot. So sometimes showing the fish something a little bit different. If your boater's flipping laydowns maybe, or flipping some of the cover, maybe pitching a drop shot with an 1/8 ounce weight might trigger a few bites that guy was not going to get, and ultimately have, you know, a really good tournament. Also, now you can change up your baits as far as what you're throwing. A worm, you can't go wrong with a hand poured worm. You can't go wrong with more of like your smallmouth, like a Ned rig style bait on a drop shot. Now I will switch back and forth between like a finesse NEKO or a rebarb style hook or a nose hook. You can play around. I like threading my plastics on no matter what, but every once in a while, if they get super fickle, I will use a nose hook. And there is times that when they get finicky that you can generate a few more bites. So that's number one. The one thing I will also tell you guys that is a major thing for me day in and day out on a spinning rod in general is 8-pound nano braid. This is Suffolk's nano braid. I mean, it is very thin, and I think that a lot of times what happens is, and I'm throwing nano braid, 8-pound nano braid to a leader line. So depending on 12, sometimes I'll put it on 12 if I'm pitching it around. Sometimes I'll put it on 8 to 8, 8-pound, advanced fluorocarbon. It really just depends on the cover that I'm dealing with. But the thing about braid, okay, in general, a lot of times I see, a lot of anglers out there picking up braid and saying, well, I'm going to throw a 20-pound braid on my spinning rod because that's like 6-pound diameter or 8-pound diameter, and that's what I throw, realistically, that's what I throw on monofilament and fluorocarbon on that reel. And I get that thought, but the problem is braid has a tendency to drag a lot more on your lures. It tends to drag, and what I mean by that is there's a lot more resistance. That line sometimes doesn't sink as well as a fluorocarbon doesn't sink. Some braids will, but they're not as dense. They're not going to sink as fast as fluorocarbon, and it tends to have your line float around a lot more. So for me, I downsized to 8-pound nano braid. Now this is the exact same line that I'm throwing. I'm reeling in the smallmouth super fast for 4, 5, 6 pounders. The one thing that negative of lighter line, like anything else, abrasion resistance, because it's so thin. I mean, this is like, I believe it's 4-pound diameter is what it is. Because it's so thin, ultimately the issue is I wouldn't recommend necessarily this to be around a lot of boat docks. And what I mean by that is or something super sharp you can break off. But I feel like overall, I get way more bites because of it. So number one, sorry, I went a little bit long-winded on that one. But there's a lot of really good information there. Number two, I'm going to tell you right now, is a NEKO weighted worm. Okay, why do I pick a NEKO weighted worm? Because it just flat out catches them. Okay, hands down, one of the techniques that you have to learn as a co-angler is throwing a wacky worm and a NEKO weighted worm. And the reason why it's so great, this is the wacky style right here. I mean, I actually have the hook. This is actually a VMC crossover ring. You guys can't really see it real well, but basically allows me to, if I'm wacky rigging it, I can just do that right there. If I'm NEKO rigging it, the way I want it is I want it to where it runs along the worm because the weight is in the head. So weight preference, you can switch it up. You can fish it deep, you can fish it shallow. This is a 3/32. I don't really throw this weight a whole lot, but I'll show you. A 16th is probably the one I'm gonna start with the most. I broke it in half right there. And so you're just putting that little nail into the head of the worm. Okay, so that is where, and this is, started out west, but it's absolutely a dynamite technique. I mean, I can remember back in Indiana, even lightening up this a lot more, going to a 32nd or even lighter, and that's something that just absolutely catching the heck out of the fish, when they're deep spawners or, just showing them something a little bit different, because what happens is that bait falls down and it's moving around, but then when you shake it, it still acts like a wacky worm. There is something about a NEKO weighted worm that just tends to get a lot of bites. Now, switching it up to having a NEKO hook or a weedless NEKO hook, that's something you got to play with as well. I mean, there's a lot of different worms that catch them out there. You can go with, your more stick worm style deal, like more of like a Cinco or something like that. or you can go with like more of like a trick worm style. If you're trying to be a little bit more finesse-y, there's so many different ways to rig a NEKO weighted worm. But for me personally, if I'm going to pick one, it's going to be that stick worm style, like this one right here, because then ultimately, if I want to wacky rig this, I have it right there. I can weightless wacky rig it, and then I can just, I'm ready to go. So that is my number 2. Again, throwing that on a setup of that 8-pound nano braid and just adjusting my leader size accordingly to what I'm fishing. Number 3 for me, it's a tough one, but it's one you definitely need to know. A vibrating jig is definitely one. You need a winding bait, okay? Now, vibrating jig just tends to get bit. Again, you have to not only play the fish, but you also have to play and understand what your partner is throwing. So if he's fishing slower, I might speed up and throw a spinnerbait behind him or a vibrating jig. If you're around a lot of grass or not as much cover, a vibrating jig is a great option. If you're not, a spinnerbait is another one. So I'm gonna say these are 1, 2. Like maybe this guy or this guy. Something to wind around is something that I'm always gonna have to rig up, because at the end of the day, if the guy's running down the bank really fast with a top water, which I do a lot, I want to have something subsurface that I can match the speed, and I can do that with a spinnerbait or a vibrating jig. That just seems to work best for me. Depending on the time of year, obviously that's gonna really depend on whether I'm, maybe I'm throwing a green pumpkin vibrating jig, or or if they're really on bluegill. If they're on shad, I'm throwing this white spinnerbait. 1/2 ounce typically is your go-to size that I'm gonna roll with. But I just feel like that to me is one you have to sort of have. I'm gonna use that as one. Number 4. Okay, number 4. Picking up this flip stick. Okay, a Texas rig for sure. I went back and forth on this. I said, well, a jig's just such a really versatile lure, but a Texas rig to me, I mean, you could just do so much with it. This is a Texas rig worm, but if I had one to choose, I'm gonna pick up a Texas rig, like something to flip. Texas rig style, little bait, little creature bait like this guy right here. Typically, probably size-wise, as far as weight, I'm gonna roll with a 3/8 because you're not in control of the trolling motor, and you need to have, you need to be able to get your bait to the bottom. I mean, this is the thing. You might even have to upsize a little bit or downsize depending how fast or slow you're going. But this is actually a 3/16. But that's always, I went back and forth on the jig because I was like, man, I love throwing a jig, but it's just, I feel like a Texas rig, gives you either a creature bait or a worm, gives you a lot of options too. You can drag it out deep, you can drag it, you can fish it shallow, you can pitch it around really heavy cover. You have more options that way. You just got to be very fluent in making those little pitches and casts, because a lot of times when someone's really going down the bank really fast or parallel on the bank, you're not going to have a whole lot of room. So you want to make sure you're giving yourself, I mean, even some of the best co-anglers I've ever fished with have literally fished behind the boat. Literally stuff that I just went over this, got him. Just sometimes every angler overlooks some small things, and we always leave fish behind. So I would say a flipping bait of some sort is definitely one I'm gonna roll with. And I'm gonna go back on that drop shot real quick here for just a second. Don't be scared. I know some of these people that are on here right now that are watching and listening, they're like, okay, a drop shot. Well, I live, in Louisiana, where the water's, pretty stained up and got a lot of cypress trees around. Listen, a drop shot catches them everywhere. I've caught them in stained water, change your worm color a little bit, but it absolutely does reel them in. Okay, so last but not least, number 5 for me, you have to have one, and I went back and forth on this one. I'm gonna roll with it. A buzzbait, okay? A buzzbait. I had to have a topwater because you guys, if you follow the channel at all, I love a topwater bait. A buzzbait, to me, allows me to cover a lot of water, but I also can slow them down. Depending on the blade size, this is a smaller blade, it's a little bit larger blade. Both these are accent buzzbaits, but And what I like about a buzzbait is I can throw that bigger blade, slow them down, choo, 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 choo. Or I can pick up that little smaller buzzbait and throw them around. When an angler is fishing, vibrating jig or a swim jig or something like that, I might throw a top water set. I almost picked up a frog in this situation too, but I catch a fish on a buzzbait from the water temperature hitting 55 degrees, 56 degrees, all the way, throughout the fall. Into where the water dropping down into the low 50s, 52 in the fall. So I just feel like this is such a great bait. It's not one I'm going to pick up all the time, but in the morning as a co-angler, if I can generate a couple big bites, this is something that I'm going to want to pick up just to make a few casts. If I don't have a whole lot of options, this is going to give me something that I could feel like at least, or the conditions, you get a little cloud cover in the afternoon, or you're fishing shade pockets. That bait right there does get bait. And the thing is about being a co-angler, you're not going back and getting your bait a lot because, at least some boaters will, some boaters won't. And so having a buzz bait, something that's a little bit more prone of not getting hung up and more weedless, if you will, or snagless sort of kind of, that it gives you a little bit more room to bang it off a dock and not get hung up with that single hook rather than a whole bunch of treble hook bait. So buzzbait is the one for me. That's what I got. I mean, I've fished a lot of tournaments. I fished against a lot of great fishermen, and I fished with a lot of great fishermen out of the back of my boat. And all of those anglers had something in common. They always were looking for what I was not. If you want to be a better co-angler, you have to continue to look and analyze the water just a little bit different than that person in the front of the boat is. And don't be afraid to do so. If they're cracking them you're fishing your tournament. That is the thing that people have to understand. A lot of times co-anglers specifically have an issue, and even boaters, we have an issue. We're not fishing against each other. We're here to have a good time, but we're also, you're fishing your tournament, I'm fishing mine. And so if I'm in the back of that boat, hey, look, a lot of times, yeah, I know it's the guy who's going to win the tournament and he's going to have 20 pounds in the front of the boat probably, but maybe for me, I might only need to have 12 or 13, and I need to get one bite every so often. Or if I have a 3-fish tournament where it's, hey, look, I only got to get a bite every 2.5 hours or something like that, So you don't, it's just, you can switch it up a little bit every once in a while, but the biggest piece of advice that I can tell you, learn how to fish finesse tactics very, very, very well. If you can learn the spinning rod game, in most cases, even when you're talking about big fish places like Chickamauga, Lake Fork, or Sam Rayburn, finesse tactics just generate bites. The fishing pressure that we have on our fisheries this day and age is just, it's gotten more and more and more and more. And those finesse tactics are playing bigger and bigger and catching bigger fish than they ever have before, because that's what you're gonna have to downsize to ultimately do. So anyway, enough rambling on. If you guys enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you don't already do so. We're always dropping some content. But those are my top five co-angler tips, techniques. I threw some stuff in there. I didn't want to forget about you guys, because I know there's a lot of great co-anglers out there. There's a lot of people that are just trying to learn, and they're going to start as a co-angler. And there's some, I call them co-angler pros. There's some co-anglers that don't fish as a boater, and literally they can whoop everybody. It happens, and there are guys like that. I know a few of them myself. So anyway, thank you guys so much for following along. We will see you on the next one.